It's our weekly program of current affairs. We call it Moral Side of the News, and we're glad you're alongside. I'm John Blim with the WHAS Crusade for Children. With me, as always, is a distinguished panel today. Reverend Sally McClain, retired Christian Church, Disciples of Christ. We welcome her back. Rabbi Stan Miles, Louisville Melton School, and Father John Stoltz, St. Aloysius Catholic Church. Welcome to you, panel. We begin with President Joe Biden and his first State of the Union address delivered this week. He covered a wide range of topics from the war in Ukraine and sanctions against Russia to COVID, his Build Back Better agenda, and his nominee for the Supreme Court. So now turning to you, panel, let's get your reaction on what you heard from President Biden.
He was all business. That speech had a beginning, it had a middle, and it had a conclusion. It wasn't verbose. He was all business. I was heartbroken at the outset because of the outside shots taken of the Capitol with the 9-foot-tall, unscalable fencing around our nation's Capitol because of a worry that January 6, 2021 would repeat itself. Thank God that never happened. I saw last night on my number one news source, Steve Colbert, that there was a demonstration planned. They were expecting 3,000 people to demonstrate at that time. They were worried. A dozen people showed up. So hopefully we as Americans are getting beyond the madness of January 6th.
Yeah, Stan, I thought what Biden was trying to do was bring us back to normal, some sort of decorum, some sort of trying to find a unity where we could all stand together. And he did that several times, I think like 3 or 4 times where the whole audience stood together to applaud, first of all, the Ukraine. I think diabetes was an issue. I can't remember what the other 2 were, or 1 or 2 were, but to bring us back to the integrity of the State of the Union and who we are in a democracy and a people. And the only thing that really upset me was that when he mentioned his son who served in the military and he got booed. And that really just went all the way through me, because you've got 1% of the people who have family members and are 1% that are in the military, and then you've got family members. And Joe Biden was one of the few that had someone serving in the military that is in Congress. So I was very disappointed with that reaction to that part of his speech.
I thought the first part of the speech about the Ukraine was a real rallying and very well done part of the speech that everyone supported. It showed our unity in the United States, and it also, those were important words, I think, for the world to hear. And I think it was a way to start with a sense of our sense of, as a nation, of being united in the United States of America. And as Sally said, there was an attempt to do that on a few occasions, to bring up some things that are really not partisan, but more bipartisan in their efforts. And I thought that was really good. I've noticed that State of the Union addresses in the past usually would bring up mostly the president's own political agenda and the agenda of his party. And it seemed to be, and then it became a pattern where that agenda is brought up, and then whatever party he belongs to or whoever is in favor of that they would applaud. And that's what would happen the whole night, is that side would applaud and the other side would just sort of sit there. And then that became sort of the genre of the State of the Union. And I think while I realize that it may serve that party and may serve that president at that particular time, I think in the long term, to bring in some sense of the issues of unity and maybe to transcend that that partisanship, to transcend it some, is really a good thing to do. It's more statesman-like, to use that particular phrase, and I think to try to approach that is really good to do.
There was another disruption during the State of the Union, and do any of you know what that disruption was about and how it was handled?
There were a couple of hecklers from members of Congress, but I don't recall exactly who. I'm not sure they identified all of them.
I guess that's a good thing, because the only thing those folks live on is not certainly logic, but publicity. And if the publicity is dried up, then hopefully they're dried up.
The other thing that he talked about was the veterans, and when the veterans come home and how we are ignoring problems that are ongoing with veterans, sort of like with COVID, with ongoing situations. But he talked about the burning pits, which I never heard my children mention, but I know our son has tested positive for tuberculosis. And I'm pretty sure that that's where that came from. And I know when I talked to our daughter about this, because she was also military, she said, he mentioned that in his speech. She said, I didn't watch his speech. And I said, yes, he did. And the obligations that the United States should have towards military who endured that kind of toxic material.
Is that akin to Agent Orange?
That's what they're saying.
Oh, my.
They're saying that it has some of the same effects as Agent Orange. So I applaud him for that, because we can say, well, we support our military, but what does that mean? That means that you're going to support 1% of the population that you consider that you pay to keep you safe, which is really very annoying for me, because it's like a service. And it is. I mean, they are called to service, but somehow I think in the United States, we've forgotten the word sacrifice.
I agree, Sally. I think it's a responsibility that we have as a nation of taking care of our veterans. And then we've known for decades that going into war-torn areas, besides the hazards of war, that of course is a hazard that we had in Vietnam and in other times like that. But there's also, as we have discovered, like Agent Orange, that there's other kinds of hazards that are part of the war duty that we discovered, and I think that taking responsibility for that as a nation is important for us to do. After all, those soldiers are there in our interest, for our own national interest.
So I was pleased that he brought some of those things out that you don't normally hear in one of these speeches. And of course, he was trying to appeal to his own agenda with the diabetes, with the childcare, the fear of losing Roe versus Wade, some of those issues, women's issues, and it was a lot to cover. And I'm hoping that none of it got lost, because I know that people, particularly with childcare issues, are paying an exorbitant amount, and women who don't make a decent salary can't afford to have their children in childcare. They just can't afford it. So I think he was trying to appeal to the nation to say, we can help remedy some of the costs if we look at these issues like medication, like childcare, and other issues like that he brought out in his speech.
I was going to point out that the largest applause of the night, in my opinion, came when he mentioned not defund the police, but fund the police, and people rose from both sides of the aisle. So I'd like to get your opinion on that, and why do you think it got such an overwhelming response?
I think it got an overwhelming response because he put it together in such a way that it made sense. He put it together in such a way that it was something that could bring us together as Americans and not pit one group of people against another group of people. When we looked at the turnout for the speech, was there just an incredible amount of social distancing, or it seemed like there were lots and lots and lots of empty places in the room? Do we know anything about that?
It seemed to be socially distanced from what I could tell, based upon everybody was strategically distanced from one another. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'd heard that Marco Rubio didn't attend, and I forgot the reason, but I heard that he refused, or he just chose not to attend. And I'm sure there were a few others. But other than that, I hadn't heard anything. It did look to me a little sparse, Stan.
Concerning those phrases like fund the police and defund the police, I think you look at those statements and realize that there are, in my opinion, various layers of meaning. That and I think that sometimes, and so one layer of meaning would be sort of the literal, or I think to use another word, a scholastic meaning, and that is so for example, defund the police would be taking money away from the police or law enforcement budget. That would be sort of the legal way. Fund the police would be exactly in the same way, in the opposite direction, that is to fund it, to give money into the police. But there's emotional layers, I think, to those phrases as well that are a little bit different. That defund the police, in my opinion, as I heard it, was an expression of anger and perhaps sadness and maybe grief, because a few years ago we were looking at, and probably still look today, to where law enforcement did unjustifiable actions against African Americans, and some, as we know, have gone to prison. Some law officers have gone to prison for it. And I think at that time, the defund police, and there's an emotional anger sort of sense there, and not necessarily a literal meaning to that. But the ends, I think everyone wants the same, but we may argue a little bit about the means to that. And that is, we all want to participate in a safe society. And I'm thinking that the president, with fund the police, was aiming in that direction. I also think that what all of this reflection calls for is the sense of thinking in smart ways of how we achieve a safer community. What are the ways that involve? And I think a smart way means that community safety does not just involve law enforcement, but it does involve the help of social workers, and it involves the help of other experts in human behavior as an assistant, and to help us all be safe. It's because the problem of human safety is a complicated one, not a simple one. And human behavior is complicated, not simple. And the way to answer it or to address it is also complicated, and therefore the response needs to be smart. It needs to be thought out. Simple phrases like fund the police, defund the police don't quite get at resolving all, or being able to express everything that needs to happen in terms of our approaches to safety. But finding ways where we know that the end would be that these particular means will lead us to a safer end, that's really, I think, what we all want, you know? And so that's my own spin on all of that I see and hear in those particular phrases and what's meant there. So I'm thinking that when President Biden said fund the police, I'm thinking that it probably could have been applauded for different reasons. One is that people, a genuine support for law enforcement, that some probably applauded for that. Some might have applauded out of reaction to the defund police movement of a couple of years ago, and that would have been a little bit of a different reason to applaud. But nevertheless, when he said it, he did get an ovation because of it.
Well, then he also said something about the police going into the communities where they serve and where they live. I think what's happened is that the police have become synonymous with the military. Yeah. What's the difference? I mean, are we using the police because we're going at war with the people? Or are we there to save the people? Yeah. And I think that's a huge distinction to make, because now they have weapons that, of course, are military weapons that can go into communities. And some of the thinking is that that's what they're going into. They're actually going into war zones when they're in these different communities in the United States. And so, that's just the thinking. Because I think that to add protection is not the same thing as going into a war zone, and treating it the same is not okay in the United States.
All right, let's move on. Here on Moral Side of the News, we're about halfway through. Thanks for watching and listening to our program. Our second topic, there is support for Ukraine across the globe. Weapons are being sent to Ukraine from the Dutch, Estonia, Poland, and Latvia. Even formerly neutral countries like Sweden and Finland are sending weapons. And a Russian businessman has offered a $1 million bounty for the arrest of Vladimir Putin. So, turning to our panel, Moral Side of the News, are you surprised by this response?
I'm thrilled, because I look back in history and I was afraid that somehow that we would find ourselves back in Munich in 1938 with peace in our time floating across the horizon, and people, I think the world community finally, as a unit, knows what they're dealing with, that they know that they're dealing with a bully with an army. And those behaviors are intolerable in this century. They were intolerable 80 years ago, for sure, because millions and millions of people lost their lives ultimately. But how much the more so now? And the idea of rattling nuclear swords, Putin is a bully, and you don't rattle nuclear swords. That is totally unhinged. It worried me at the outset of the invasion of Ukraine that he sent his troops through Chernobyl. Mm-hmm. First of all, that shows a complete disregard for the health and safety of his troops, not because of Ukrainians. They're not going to be there, but because of what the Russian troops will be exposed to and their problems, not immediately, but 5, 10, 15 years down the road.
Was that because it was an easier access, a faster route to go where he wanted to go? Is that why he did that? Do you know?
From what I gather, yes. Originally I was thinking, and it's my, I guess it's my paranoia seeping through, or too many Tom Clancy novels, that there was some sort of thing in Chernobyl that Putin would get, and it would be the ultimate weapon or so. But I guess thank goodness that's not the case. But the idea, there is such a disregard for life with Vladimir Putin. And people, the Ukrainians certainly get it. And now the world community is as well.
Well, and Biden trying to walk that tightrope between what's going on in the Ukraine and an all-out nuclear war has to be a very fragile thing that he's doing that has to be extremely well thought out. And plus you throw China into the mix. It's all very confusing because now they're saying that even though Putin is in the Ukraine, he may not be able to sustain his troops for a long period of time. So I know he wants to expand his territory, but it just seems like it's not something that's going to be productive and going to last. I mean, it's going to be devastating.
I think if Vladimir Putin took the risk that the West would not care about the invasion of the Ukraine, he was mistaken. And I think if he thought that the West would just pay attention to it only a little bit or give it lip service, to me, that doesn't seem to be the case. Rather, I think that the West has is in a sense used sanctions, and these sanctions seem to be pretty powerful into what effect that they're having on the Russian economy and on many of the interests that Vladimir Putin would have in the world. You know, I think it's isolated him and it's isolated Russia in a way, and it seems to me what I'm hearing about are the reports about the power of those sanctions, which I did not think would happen, and that the West would be so united in its efforts around this. The one thing is that, as Sally noted, and also as Stan noted too, is that right now then security in the world state is also, there's fears that that's a little more fragile at this point, you know, because of this. But just to think that one nation would actually enter into the sovereignty of another nation and just have disregard for it is just really today in today's world, for that to happen is very disheartening that would occur just like that.
You know, I'm thinking of the French Revolution. Is it that we're trying to turn the people against the government in Russia? If the people are so dissatisfied and put upon to have just the basics of living, would they then create the possibility to turn against Putin and the government? Would they even have that? I mean, I know that there have been they're reporting something like 6,000 arrests in Russia because of protest. And that's only increased because of the economic sanctions. So I'm wondering if it's going to be strong enough or if they even have the possibility of overthrowing the government themselves. That is the huge question. I applaud the patriotic people in Ukraine and also the courageous people in Russia who are going into the middle of Red Square and protesting Vladimir Putin. That is an act of real, incredible courage. It is putting your life on the line for the concept of freedom.
Right. And I think only recently, I mean, those angers towards the Russian government, towards Vladimir Putin, I don't think are new because, you know, recently he had an opposition candidate that I think was poisoned and then eventually put into prison, someone who opposed him politically. And there, I think there has been an opposition there already to him before this war even began. And so that was already in existence.
You know, so that's how you take care of your opposition, right? And you poison them in prison, right? Is that how that works?
What I'm most taken by, though, is every time you turn on your phone or turn on the TV, something new has happened. Most recently, the seizing of yachts of some of these oligarchs, one by France, one by Germany. So there's this worldwide response that I don't know, and I'll just throw it at you. We've got about 2 minutes left, but did you expect that kind of response from world powers?
I was hoping for it. So I guess the emotion is rather pleasant surprise.
Well, and trying to inflict pain where it counts, I think is what they're trying to do. And so if these oligarchs, which I had to look up, I didn't even know what that was, are experiencing some sort of pain and they're the main supporters of Putin, then I think that's a very credible thing to do.
And I have never seen or heard of sanctions to that extent before. As I said, I mean, it's kind of amazing the amount of these sanctions and the power that it may have in situations like this to bring about a peace or a justice to people.
Well, I think that our main concern is that democracy be protected and defended. Yes. And that we are all in support of the Ukrainians, and hopefully there's more that we can do to make their country free again.
We've got about a minute left. Anybody like to say just something you might want to say to the Ukrainian people to give them hope in their siege ahead?
Thoughts and prayers aren't enough. Yeah. They're nice, they're lovely, but they're not enough. Yeah. I just hope that we stand with them so that they can throw off the yoke of tyranny in their country, that we stand by them, that we support them in every way possible. And the president of Ukraine, when our government said to him, you know, we've got a plane waiting for you and a helicopter, get out of there. He said, I don't want to ride. I'm staying here. I just want to help. I want to get these interlopers, these invaders off our land. And I thought, what a hero. And we're starved for heroism in our world today. And this man is providing a view of a real hero.
This human being gives us hope.
Very good. Thank you, Sally. Thank you, Stan. I have to wrap it up on this edition of Moral Side of the News. Thank you to Sally McClain, Stan Miles, and John Stoltz. You can catch this program again on YouTube. Just go to YouTube and search for Moral Side of the News. In less than 3 months, it'll be time for the 69th annual WHAS Crusade for Children on June 4th and 5th. And you can be a part of it right now. Just go to WHAScrusade.org. That's WHAScrusade.org and see the many ways you can help change a child's life. Join us again next week as the conversation continues on Moral Side of the News.